This is the one and only correct tier list for maps in Xdefiant. I'm just kidding, but as we go through the video and rank each of the maps, if you agree or disagree, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in the comments below. This was actually way more difficult than I thought it was going to be, and for good reason. There aren't really any bad maps in this game so far, and I think the team at Xdefiant deserves a ton of credit for how solid all of these maps are front to back. Now, there are a few maps that I have some issues with, and one map that I almost want to back out of immediately when I see it. All in all, this is a very good collection of maps to play on for launch. There's also a common trait that I noticed almost every single map has that I'll explain a little bit later in the video, and I'm curious to know if anyone else picked up on it. I'll give you a quick hint. The only maps that don't have this feature are Mayday and Emporium. Alright, let's jump into the first map on the list, Arena. This is a really cool looking map. This is basically the shipment of Xdefiant, and for a small map, it's really good because it has relief spawns in the back and the side hallways. However, spawn trapping can still be a problem because of its size. The top center area is a little bit weird at times, but if someone knows how to really hold down that area, they can be incredibly hard to challenge. Me and my buddies the other night were playing on Arena, and we went up against what I can only imagine is a full 6-stack or like a group of streamers and content creators, and we were spawn trapped. They knew how to hold down every single power position, every single lane, and they had one guy holding down that top area who could look into the spawns, and I think he was running a sniper to just pick us off as soon as we walked out of the door. But overall, a really cool map, and I go back and forth on how much I like it depending on the game that I'm playing. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the tiny maps that are essentially the fast food of first-person shooters, so for that reason, Arena goes in the B tier. Next, we've got Attica Heights. Off the rip, this is a really solid map. It's the right size, plays really well for all the game modes, and I like that it has this interesting spot in the middle where you can jump through a hole to get to the bottom floor. It can be a little annoying trying to capture the point and occupy or the B flag on domination in the center of the map, but it makes a lot of sense for this game because it requires teamwork and using all of the character abilities to successfully hold the point against a good team. The only issue I really have is when a sniper just camps out on the bridge looking down at the B flag and just picks people off. I feel like the opening above it is more than enough challenge for that part of the map. All things considered, I think Attica Heights earns a place in the A tier category. Overall, a really well-made map with a good theme. One thing I try to do in a lot of games is look outside of the map or outside of the playable area and appreciate all the work the art team puts into painting a cohesive picture. Obviously, this is a little harder in Xdefiant because at the time of recording this video, we don't have private matches yet. Next, we've got Dumbo. I like this map, but the center is extremely chaotic and difficult, and honestly, you don't want to get caught in the middle by yourself because there's 4 ways into the center area, as well as a second floor balcony looking over that crate. So if you're a solo player, you either have to find a random teammate to attach yourself at the hip and hope they cover you, or play around the edges of the map until you can find an opening to dip your toe in. But you don't really want to stick around the center too long unless you're fighting for the objective. I will say the one thing this map does really well is give you the option to hold longer sight lines and catch people trying to run a flank route, as well as create spaces on the map where you can really get isolated gunfights and make it back into cover. The only issue I feel like I have with this map is that the spawns get a little bit weird in domination and they don't quite flip when they should, which is a common issue on a few other maps, and that can feel frustrating because if you go up against a good team, it can be really oppressive and you can't get out of your spawn. I'm going to put this map solidly in the A tier because it plays so well in all the game modes, but I think it's just missing that little extra something to get it into the S tier category. Next, we've got Echelon. This is a map that initially I didn't care for, but as I started to learn the map, it really grew on me, and because of the close quarters nature of this map, it kind of forces you to play with SMGs and shotguns. Now, I have seen some psychopaths running around with snipers, but for the most part, the engagements you get into on this map are up close and personal. I think this map does the small, fast-paced style map better than Arena. I've really come to like this map, and it starts to feel kind of like a maze with a lot of different routes that you can take, and if you're smart, you can jump in, pick off an enemy, reposition, pick off another enemy, and always keep them guessing, which ironically makes the Echelon faction really strong on the Echelon map. And so for me, Echelon's going to go to the A tier category. I think this is one of, if not my favorite map to play hotshot on, because even though you're marked on the map as hotshot, there are plenty of ways to break line of sight instead of just getting picked off down an open lane or someone camping the high ground with a sniper, which is a perfect segue into the next map, Emporium. If you were wondering which map I almost back out of immediately, it's this one. This map is aesthetically really cool and the art team did a great job. In fact, it almost feels like a map from something like Black Ops Cold War, but it's almost impossible to push up onto the second floor if the enemy team is locking it down, and they don't even have to be good. When a team is holding the second floor, they have the high ground that that can almost see into both spawns, as well as plenty of cover and relief if they need to back up to heal or reload. And maybe this is a skill issue on my part, so please let me know if I'm crazy in the comments, or if you found a way to break into the impenetrable fortress of the second floor. I also think there's a little bit of asymmetry in the map when it comes to what side you spawn on. If you spawn on the outside area, it feels like it's much closer to that second floor, so whichever team spawns outside gets an immediate advantage, or so it seems. I can't wait until we get private matches so I can test things like this out a little bit more in depth, but again, that's just been my experience. Now, that being said, this map isn't completely garbage like some maps in other games, so it's still going to go into the D category. Next, we've got Liberty. This is one of my favorite maps from the first time that I played it way back in the beta last year, and feels like an instant classic. Not too big, not too small, but has the right amount of variety, with good sight lines, good cover to play off of, and overall a really well balanced map. I think Liberty is going to play really well competitively, and technically it's a pretty straightforward 3-lane map, but the way they've managed to structure the objectives, lanes, and pieces of cover breaks it up in a really good way. My only gripe with this map, for lack of a better term, is the sniper perch on the seaside spawn. I'm not the biggest fan of designated camping spots, but it does have an equal and opposite position on the boat in the center of the map, and you can also flank enemies and take them out from behind relatively easily. I just really like the art style and design of this map, and one of my favorite things ever in game design is when video games borrow from real life. I like the head falling from the Statue of Liberty, the New York skyline in the background. It just gives the map so much more personality and character rather than just being a generic facility. So this map earns a solid spot in the S tier category. Next, we've got Mayday. Thematically a great map with Air Force One crashed through the middle of the map, and like I said before, I'm a sucker for games that borrow from real life, so this is really cool. But Mayday does have some major design flaws where the B flag is almost unapproachable and the plane wing is a sniper's wet dream. The only real counter to snipers camping on the plane wing is a small tower, and it's only on one side of the map. I think it could maybe be improved if they just removed some of the cover from the plane wing so you could at least challenge people sitting up there. It's almost impossible to walk up to the interior of the plane because you have to cross the wide open to get there. And for those reasons, it's not a great domination map, but Hotshot and Occupy tend to play a little bit better because there's not quite as much of an advantage or incentive to camping the plane. So for those reasons, Mayday goes to the C tier. Up next, we've got Showtime. This is just a really solid, straightforward map. One of my favorite things about Showtime is how unique each part of the map is, because they're all different styles and different sets for filming. The only issue I have is the second floor areas are almost impossible to challenge and give players the ability to snipe across the entire map, as well as camp your spawn and shoot you in the back. Now, camping the spawn is fine. I'm all for checking your corners, but having to walk out of your spawn and do a 360 every time is a bit silly. And so for those reasons, Showtime is going to go into the B category. Up next, we've got Noodleplex, one of the best design maps in the game from an aesthetic perspective, and if you can't tell, it's clearly inspired by the Google campus. Noodleplex is really well balanced, and it's basically another traditional 3-lane style map, but the way that they've designed the different lanes and routes breaks it up enough so that it doesn't quite feel as monotonous. Each section of the map is kind of contained in its own area so that you're really able to isolate your gunfights and not get shot across the map. Both Domination and Occupy play really well on this map. However, Hotshot is a little bit hit or miss just because while it's not the biggest map, it is a little bit longer front to back, so sometimes getting back into the action can take a minute, or if the Hotshot decides to go camp in the back of the map, it can feel a little dry at times. But that being said, this is one of my favorite maps in the game, so Noodleplex earns a solid spot in the S tier category. Up next, we've got Pueblito. This is a map that manages to balance everything perfectly. It's the right size, has just enough flank routes, and the right amount of space with pieces of cover to play off of in all of the right places. Each part of the map feels like it's its own section and kind of has its own playstyle within it, and you're also not getting cross-mapped by someone with a sniper. One thing I find myself doing when loading into a match is picking a weapon type that best fits that map style. Mayday for long-range weapons, Echelon for SMGs and shotguns, and ARs play pretty well on a lot of the maps. But on Pueblito, you can kind of use whatever you want. Every weapon type is viable if you know how to position yourself and play accordingly. And yes, that is technically true of all of the maps, but Pueblito does it exceptionally well. I never find myself switching to a different weapon in the middle of the game just to be more competitive. And some of the maps we've talked about already play better for certain game modes, but this is one that just plays well on all of them. And one thing I'd like to point out here is I really like how the A and C points on Domination are actually relatively close together, so it's not super obvious that when you spawn in, you always have to be pushing B. And that makes the objectives in Domination play a lot more dynamic and fluid. And for those reasons, Pueblito is also going to go in the S tier category. Next, we're going to rate the escort and zone control maps, also known as the progression maps. But before we do that, I wanted to answer the question I dropped in the very beginning of the video. And if you didn't notice, every single arena map in Xdefiant has high ground looking over the central or B flag area, with the exception of Emporium and Mayday. Both of those maps don't have high ground over the B flag area because, well, they are the high ground. I'm not sure if this was an intentional choice in their game design philosophy or just a happy accident, but now that you know, you can't unsee it. What you do with this information is up to you. Up first for the big team maps is Midway. This map is extremely colorful and a really interesting setting taking place in a theme park. Overall, really well balanced and straightforward map. The very middle of the map, or the C objective, is kind of a difficult choke point to get through, and if you're attacking, it can feel very punishing to try and push through this area. If you're defending, it kind of feels like shooting fish in a barrel, and there's really not a whole lot of cover. If either you or the enemy team knows what they're doing, that center point of the map is going to be the stopping point in most of your matches, or at the very least going to take the most time. But besides that, the map has a good amount of cover and angles to take or defend objectives, and overall really allows character abilities to shine. For some reason, I feel like your team composition matters more on these bigger progression maps, and yes, leveraging your faction abilities is obviously a big part in the arena maps, but I think the bigger maps and modes were designed with competitive balance in mind, and using the right team comp for attacking and defending can 100% make or break your game. But that being said, Midway is going to find its home in the B tier. Let me know if you guys are interested in me doing a full breakdown video of strategies for these maps and modes. Next, we've got Times Square. Thematically an amazing map, and it's really well designed. However, I may get some heat for this, but Times Square kind of feels like the Piccadilly of Xdefiant. If you don't get that reference, I envy you. As much as I like the theme of this map, there are just too many nooks and crannies for people to hide in. I like the way the map is laid out with all the different lanes and rooms that it offers, but there's just so many pieces of cover, and visually it's so busy that often you'll find yourself getting shot from the side or in the back even after checking your corners, which is why this map is infested with snipers hard-scoping every single lane. This map is a sniper's paradise. Tons of long sight lines and windows to camp, with plenty of wide open spaces to catch people out. The spawns also feel kind of far away, especially with how long the respawn delay on these maps is. I do like this map, but it can be extremely frustrating at times, and for that reason it earns the C tier rank. Next, we've got Zoo. This map I honestly don't have a lot to say about. In many ways, it's extremely similar to Midway that we already talked about. Very straightforward map where, again, the middle of the map is going to be that sticking point. I do like this map, but there's nothing here that really stands out as negative or unplayable, so for me, it's going to go in the B tier category. Last on the list, we've got Meltdown, probably my favorite and least linear map of the 4 progression maps. This is one of my favorite maps because it has a lot of turns and bends as you progress through the map, and also each section kind of has its own style of gameplay, as weird as that sounds. The first area is much more wide open and snipers really dominate here, but as you move through the sections, it starts to get pretty narrow and really forces you into some tight spots. Meltdown also has the most depth in terms of options to play on height. There's plenty of hallways and rooms up on the second floor, but nothing that's like crazy overpowered, because there's always an equal and opposite high ground position for the other team to counter you. And that's something I really like about most of the maps in the game. While they might not be perfectly symmetrical, they're often very balanced when it comes to power positions and available cover. I think Meltdown should be the gold standard if they plan on introducing more progression maps in later seasons. I do enjoy the bigger maps and modes, but I'd like to see something a little bit less straightforward that allows for more gameplay variety like we have in Meltdown. So for me, this map earns a spot in the A tier. And that brings me to the bonus or final map, if you consider it a map at all, the practice zone. I'm so happy Xdefiant added a proper firing range that's actually helpful. My favorite feature is the time to kill targets, because I can tangibly see how each weapon performs across various ranges, as well as how all the different attachments affect your weapon. This has helped me a ton when comparing different weapons and trying out different builds. Compared to other games that we won't name here, this is a much more feature-rich firing range that is actually useful. For now, this is going to go into the B tier category because I think it could use a few more features before we start to reach the A or S tier. First off, we need to have the zone open that lets you try out the different factions and their abilities, so hopefully that's coming soon. Second of all, I think all of the attachments should be available for practice and testing while you're in the firing range. It's not the biggest issue, but it would be a nice touch. And lastly, I'd like to be able to queue into the practice zone with friends, and what would truly make it S tier is having a 1v1 zone similar to the range in Apex Legends. Xdefiant can be a hard game, so I'm glad that we have the practice zone, especially for people coming over from games that don't have things like character abilities, and famously, there's no skill-based matchmaking or engagement optimized matchmaking to protect you. So if you're struggling with the game or just trying to learn as much as possible to improve, check out my tips video on how to stop dying in Xdefiant here.